So I'm here in my little shed, and this is also the start of my new engine build. It's gonna be a high RPM turbo MX5 engine, so that's why I have this BP 1.8 liter engine block sitting right next to me. And of course it's gonna have forged pistons, forged rods, also a balanced crankshaft, billet, oil pump, all the good stuff. And it's also going to have a pretty tricky cylinder head, but I'm not going to say anything about that right now. And the video series that I'm going to be doing in the next couple of weeks will cover hopefully pretty much all the steps, or most of the steps, for building this engine and putting it in and maybe tuning the ECU. We'll see how far we'll get. And the first step is going to be filing the piston rings. So I hope you enjoy it, and I'm going to try to crank out new videos as fast as I can. I'm going to be building pretty much every night now. So hope you enjoy it. Most aftermarket forged pistons that you can buy come with ring sets, piston ring sets, that have to be filed down to the correct end gap. And the JE pistons that I have for this build, for example, this piston here, also has a ring set that needs to be filed down to the correct end gap. So the first thing we need to do is we need to put each individual compression ring, we have 8 of them for this 4-cylinder engine, into the corresponding bores. So this one's for cylinder number 2. We're just going to carefully set the piston ring inside there, and then, for example, use a piston to set the ring inside of the bore. Just make sure that you don't put it in crooked, just put it in parallel to the deck surface, otherwise you will have incorrect measurements. And then you will need a set of feeler gauges like these. I live in Europe, so that's why I have millimeter. So I'm just gonna try, let's see, 0.3 millimeters. Let's see if it fits. Okay, so the end gap for this ring is 0.3 millimeters, but we will still have to file it down to the correct end gap. And I'm just gonna show you how I'm gonna do it now. So we've measured 0.3 millimeters ring end gap. And for these piston rings, we have this table here from the manufacturer, and I'm going to use the application Street Moderate Turbo Nitrous. And for the top ring, for example, I will have to multiply the bore size, all in inches, by this number, for example, 0.005 inches. I've already converted all of that stuff into millimeters. So the ring end gap I'm looking for with the top compression ring would be 0.42 millimeters. So I will still have to grind off some of that stuff to get the correct end gap. And for that we have this piston ring filer. And this is a fairly cheap example. And to file this ring, we will have to set it here. Make sure it's parallel to this axis here from this grinding wheel. Don't put it in like this or that, obviously. And then just butt the ends together and carefully grind off, little by little, step by step. And then always keep checking the end gap until it fits. And all the time when you're filing this stuff down, there's always a burr to these edges here. So just take a really soft file and just carefully file down and deburr all the edges. So when you put it into the bore, it's not going to scratch your cylinder walls. So now that I've kept going back and forth with this piston ring, I think I now have the correct end gap. So I'm just gonna set it into the bore one more time. And this is the feeler gauge. 0.42 millimeters. And I'm just gonna have to see if it fits. Okay, it does fit in between this gap here. And now I have the correct end gap for cylinder number 2, compression ring number 1. And I'm gonna have to repeat that process for the remaining 2 cylinders and also for the lower compression rings, which, by the way, look like this. I'm not gonna cover that, but it's essentially the exact same process, except when filing these, I might have to file a little less aggressive because they're made out of a different material. And what I also want to add is, when you're filing and measuring all that stuff, always make sure that the mark, it says N here, for example, on this ring, that it stays on top all the time when you're putting it into the bore, when you're filing, that it points upward, and especially when you're gonna put it onto your piston later on. Yeah, so that's it.